our next remake versus is going to be these two, like I said, from the 70s and from the mid 2000s. The mid 2000s, when we were kind of in this area where action movies kind of had a sort of similar, sort of frenetic look to them and weren't that great in quality, at least like the major ones, the ones that were like kind of coming out seemingly every week, as far as I go. They had this company Rogue that was putting stuff out that was various in quality. And these are the people that decided to remake another John Carpenter classic. From his pre-horror days, 2 years predating Halloween. And as far as these go, the original movie kind of always had an impact on me in a number of ways as I was growing up. And I didn't see the remake in theaters, but I saw it like right when it came out on DVD, and it didn't really leave a very good impression. But maybe, possibly, it's grown on me over time. And interestingly enough, as we've talked about before, doing this remake versus, particularly the Manchurian Candidate, where it's like sometimes when you put something up against the original movie, it can really highlight how terrible a remake can be, or like how bad of an idea or how useless of an idea a remake can be. But then there's other times where you can put a remake up against the original, and while it may not top it, it may actually highlight some of the good things that remakes can do as far as taking a story and sort of modernizing it, not just within the story itself, but making a more modern feel to the concept. So, the interesting thing about talking about modern versus classic, I guess you could say, is what approach Carpenter was taking with his movie from 1976. And it's really interesting because I talked about just now it being pre-horror Carpenter, because he had made one movie before this that was like a sci-fi comedy, and then it was this, and then Halloween, and then Halloween. It kind of took it. Obviously, Escape from New York and stuff like that, and Starman were in there, but a lot of horror in there for a while, and obviously, and we'll continue to talk about that next month, being a complete and total master of it. So it's interesting when you come back to Assault on Precinct 13 and realize that the main influence was Howard Hawks and his westerns, and it's like you get it. Like when you see the plot and how simple it is, and you have your good guys with guns and your bad guys with guns, and you've got a police station and somebody on the inside that people are trying to get to. It's obviously it's 100% you get the idea that this was based on his love of westerns. But with that said, I do think this movie does have a lot of subtle horror in it, and maybe sometimes even not so subtle horror, and like you can really see that horror is something that this director was destined for, despite the fact that he was kind of mainly going for the western feel at the time. But just even when it starts, like we do get the whole setting off point with the theft and then the shooting and all that, but then you get scenes like the blood oath, and you've got the very unmistakable Carpenter score going on, and just everything has like this impending doom to it. Like everything has this blood and death are about to rain down kind of feeling, and that can be pretty scary. And then when you see some of the opening scenes, like when they're just driving around and just aiming at anybody, just any random person, that is a horror movie, especially now. And then not even to mention that you have the Kim Richards moment, another thing that kind of sets off everything. And I was a kid when I saw this movie for the first time, and it's always traumatizing when you're a kid and you see a kid die in a movie. But I mean, this particular way, where it was so unceremonious and so soulless. It was terrifying. Honestly, I hated that scene then, and I hate that scene now. Because it's like, and they really built up just her innocent nature too. Once again, it is important because it really sets into motion literally everything that happens. Because once her dad, basically, they follow him to the police station, then everything goes down. So it's a necessary evil, story wise. But that's the thing here is that you look at it and the way it starts off with these three seemingly totally unrelated events, where we've got the shooting of Kim Richards, and then we've got and just that whole setup of the blood oath and why that's even happening. But then we've got the introduction of Napoleon Wilson, who's the big sort of crime guy that's being transported from one place to the next, for prison. And then we also have Bishop, our lead character, who's like this sort of old-fashioned hero cop, and we get his whole introduction. And it's like there's almost kind of a mystery element to the movie also, because you're wondering exactly how all these things could possibly come together. And the great thing about that is even the movie is only an hour and a half, a very, very swift hour and a half, and it takes its sweet time making sure that these things will eventually converge. It's very, very methodical, about how these things are coming together, but it's letting everything play out like in its own way for a while. Then a convergence will happen, and you do get that sense. Like, it doesn't feel completely aimless. You always get that sense. Like I was talking about, that sort of impending feel going into it, where it's like you do get a sense that something big is about to happen. And the fact that they wait till about halfway through the movie, halfway through a very short movie, for everything to converge, is very, very well done. And so that's kind of the first thing I want to talk about how this remake is going to handle that, because an action movie in 2005 is not going to be very methodical. It wants to get right to it, and it wants to be as loud and all over the place as possible, as soon as possible. So, we do start off with this opening scene, and I remember when I said that I didn't care for this the first time I saw it, the one thing that really stood out was this opening scene, where it shows Ethan Hawke undercover as this drug addict, as this thing is going on. Him and Titus Welliver are having this back and forth, and just right away you get this really sort of frenetic feel when it's just Ethan Hawke talking. And we've seen in plenty of movies like Tape, where you get a coked out Ethan Hawke, you can just put a camera on him, and that's your scene, and you could make a whole movie out of it, like pretty much Tape was. But here, yeah, then we're opening, and it kind of reminds me of the opening of Narc a little bit. Where like it starts off and then it gets into this really frenetic nature, and then you realize this is your big opening. Also resulting in a death, and then how that affects our main character, this cop. Yeah, obviously this turns into what will ultimately be, you can call it, Assault on Precinct 13, the remake, or you can also call it Headshots, the movie. There is headshots galore. Like, I feel like almost there's so many people die in this movie, I feel like almost every person that dies is by headshot. So all of the deaths are very quick and very fatal. So, obviously it's going to be of this very violent nature. Like I said, sort of setting off the very methodical vibe the original had going on. But what I really like that they do here is, first of all, once again, introducing the characters. That's Hawke's introduction. Fishburne's introduction, being in place of, Napoleon here, which is very funny, because obviously they're sort of toying, with what's going on here. Because credit to James DeMonaco, who is the screenwriter, who would go on to do the Purge movies with Ethan Hawke, of course. But here, introducing him as this big bad villain, because mostly, like Napoleon in the original movie is introduced through just, like dialogue, talking about how big he is. And here, what I was going to say about DeMonaco in the screenplay was, we're switching the names up here in a pretty interesting way, where it was, in the opening scene, Ethan Hawke is jokingly referred to as Napoleon, like the historical figure, which of course was the villain's name the big crime guy's name in the original movie. And here, Bishop was the good cop in the original movie. Now Bishop is the name of Fishburne's character, the big crime guy. It's a little confusing, but I'd say clever enough that it's okay. But yeah, talking about character introductions, if you want to talk about introducing this character in a big bad way through mostly dialogue, he does stab somebody in the throat in public, and that definitely sets him up also. But there's some dialogue here that really sets him up in a cool way. And this is a case where movies of this era were especially having problems with this, and that was having dialogue where you were kind of you were trying too hard to be cool or threatening or whatever, especially if you were writing a bad guy. But there's a great piece of dialogue here where Lawrence Fishburne talks about having lost his faith in God, and the thing that made him lose his faith was he killed so many people. He faced so many people, and while these people were praying to God to intervene against him, um, and it's like having not seen that, like having God not intervening against him is what made him lose his faith. And it's like that's a really cool setup to set up somebody that's really big and threatening. And he has these throughout. He has that moment with Kim Coates towards the beginning when he's being transferred. And then I like how before stuff really kicks into gear, how limited his dialogue is. Like when he's actually in like the cell with Leguizamo and the other one, he's just not really much talking at all. But you kind of just get that sense of the weight that comes with him and his character, and so that's great. But talking about the methodical nature of the original movie and how things are going to come together, it's not really being slow in its process about how things are coming together here. It's all kind of happening pretty quickly. But what I really like that this one does to kind of replace that is the way it works with misdirect. Where it's like why everyone is here all at once and what's going on with this assault. For a little bit, they set up that it's something else entirely, where it's people trying to break him out. And you just kind of go with the flow of that. And it's like you're going with the flow of the changes of the script that have been made. And it's like, okay, I could see this being the plot. It's simpler, but it's and to be simpler than the very bare bones concept, the very straightforward concept of the original movie, that's something. So it does find ways to complicate that a bit, and this would be the case normally where I would be critical, because it's like if you have a bare bones concept that works, the last thing you want to do is overcomplicate it and like add a whole bunch of different problems and different sort of weavings or whatever. But the way they do it here is actually pretty well done, and how the story comes together about Gabriel Byrne and the other cops and what all is going on with that and this whole, and it's like there's so much misdirection going on for like the first third of this movie or so as things fall into place. So it's still like sort of saying, oh, so this is what's happening and this is, and it's like the way they do those gradual reveals, I feel like is a pretty decent replacement for just kind of letting things lay low until everything kicks off. And it's like, how it looks, it's definitely smarter and more well put together than the frenetic 2005 action movie that it looks like, which is nice. And as far as like other side characters go, I do feel like this is where the remake also kind of went in a bit more, because we do have side characters here, a couple of eventual Carpenter regulars with Charles Cyphers and Nancy Loomis hanging out here, albeit briefly. Both of them are killed off pretty early, but there is the case that I love where we kind of start to see. It's not so much like that the table's turning kind of feel, where it's like when it starts off the original movie, and like I said, it has that horror feel where like once they get to the police station, everybody's just kind of lurking in the darkness, and it's like sometimes you see them lined up in the street, and then sometimes you don't see them at all. Just the gunshots are seemingly coming from nowhere, in this really terrifying sequence. And that's something that is, like I said, as far as here, there's obviously going to be a lot of chaos, where it's like it feels like much more controlled chaos in this one. There's a lot, but the idea of how these characters go about defending themselves, and seeing these characters that set themselves up as, oh, we're the good guys, but kind of see them have to become the enemy in a sense, where we see these characters that are like, oh, we just want to do good and we just want to help, are now like this small army. And we get this greatly edited portion here where they're just firing back all of them. And we see, like, when Wilson gets a gun, and we really get the sense of, oh, this is that killer everybody was really building up. And it's, as far as this one goes, it's what I really like the way they handle it is making sure that we don't forget the kind of characters that we're dealing with, because we do have more on the criminal side here. Like, the criminals here seem much more sort of outwardly threatening, I guess you could say. Like when we see Beck, just stabbing a guy repeatedly long after he's already dead, and it's like this just kind of reminder of who these people are. Like Wells in the original movie, I feel like doesn't quite reach. It's like I feel like we need a bit more reminders in the original movie of just who the people we are working with here. They do it well, and I'm not saying like beat us over the head with it or anything. Like you could maybe say maybe that's too on the nose in the remake, by showing how crazy Beck is in particular, and then bringing in this Brian Dennehy problem where like Beck's paranoia really plays a part in this, where it's like he's not sure if Matt Craven has been sent in or not, and Dennehy's saying like oh we should just like take them out now, and it's like that sort of inner sort of conflict going on. I feel like actually adds something to it. Where like I said, normally I'd almost be kind of pissed probably that they'd be overcomplicating what is essentially a simple concept when that's not always necessary. But like I said, the additions here are actually kind of working. Like I said, the way they approach the characters, where we don't get a lot of like the character dynamic in the original movie, but here we got like that scene where the camera's sort of panning across, and we're seeing like into different rooms and everybody sort of interacting, and it's always a cop and a criminal interacting, or at least a protagonist, and because Maria Bello obviously isn't quite there, but she's part of our protagonist sort of crew here. But another thing that I actually like that both movies do, even though they're doing it differently, is the idea of having like a main protagonist. Because here in the original movie we have Austin Stoker doing Bishop, and he's like, like I said, he's like that old-fashioned hero kind of cop. Whereas Ethan Hawke is definitely like got the action hero vibe in this movie, but I actually kind of like that he's not completely likable, and like his drug problem makes him very questionable, especially when we see the opening scene. And then the fact that when he's talking to Maria Bello in those early scenes, he's actually kind of slimy. Like the way he says, like, I know you just want to fuck me, I'm just waiting for you to say it, and stuff like that. It's like, that's an interesting approach to take to a hero. And I feel like a lot of heroes were kind of like that in this era of action movie. And a lot of the time it didn't work. A lot of the time it was like, why are we supposed to root for this guy? I kind of want to see him go out just as much as I want to see the villains go out. But there's something that Ethan Hawke just kind of inherently has to where he can do both of these at once. And it's like if there was, a handful of actors I was going to rely on to be able to pull off something like this, he would obviously be one of them. And I feel like he pulls that off really nicely here. Especially the thing he has going with Fishburne, the chemistry between the two of them when they have scenes together, I feel like is really something. And you can see that in Bishop and Napoleon in the original movie as well. But I do think this one does take the time to delve into character a little more. But that's not necessarily to say, because I was asked recently, like, what makes a good script, and the only thing that I could really think of to answer it at the time was the characters have a lot to do with that, typically. In this particular case, though, I do think the case can be made that while it's great to add character, there's nothing wrong with adding to character. It's just Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13 is such a great example of how you can just kind of take a very straightforward concept and treat it very straightforward, and you'll get the impact that you need, and you'll tell the story that you need to tell in the way that you do, because that's just what Carpenter can do, because Carpenter just has such a feel in general, like just such a mood that that in itself can carry a whole story. To where it's like that's like that mood, like when you go to a Carpenter movie, it's the Carpenter mood that he sets and the Carpenter atmosphere that he sets. That's the reason that you watch Carpenter movies, and like many people, including myself, watch Carpenter movies over and over and over and over again. And that's the thing. And just a couple years later, when he'd really just shoot off into the stratosphere with Halloween, it was because he took the simplest possible concept and just made it a mood. And that's what he's doing here 2 years before Halloween with a movie that's not even a horror movie, but still feels a hell of a lot like one. And talking about the characters, there is a moment we eventually reach with both of these movies, and that is that sort of feeling of hopelessness that's eventually reached, where it's like we do reach the point in the story to where it's like, oh shit, we're never getting out of here. Like this is not going to end well for us, the protagonists. And that's the moment where it's sort of the same setup in both movies, where a character is going to get out of the building, sneak out of the building, hopefully get to a vehicle, and get out. And this is thwarted in the most hopeless of ways. Where Wells is here, and there's that great moment beforehand where Wells is talking about like, oh, I never had good luck. Like my luck has always been bad. I am the last person you want to do this. And it's like usually the trope is the person with all the bad luck is gonna finally get one stroke of good luck at just the right moment, just at just the right time, and it's gonna be great. And nope, Wells was bad luck to the bitter end. And just that in itself just sets up this whole pessimistic feeling, where it's like, and it's like that's something when you can actually do a movie like this and get to that point where you make the audience get pessimistic, because most audiences go into movies like this assuming good guys will win out. So to actually reach a point where it's like, oh shit, and they like really went in on this in the remake. They killed off characters left and right in this moment. Leguizamo gets killed, Jarul gets killed, Maria Bello gets killed, the other woman gets killed that was driving. Bello especially is a character that you kind of like, because you almost think they're gonna, wimp out because the car crashes and we know the driver's been shot, but then we don't see a Maria Bello death, so it's like, oh, of course they let her live because she's one of the main characters, and she and Hawk kind of had a thing going on like she was going to be a love interest or something, and so they pull her out, and then it's like, oh, they're going to hold her hostage, and we're going to have that whole thing. No, like I said before, this is Headshots the movie. So that's kind of amazing. I actually kind of love that moment. And I love how dire and pessimistic it makes everything. Where it's like, Maria Bello is one of those characters where it's like, well, shit. If Gabriel Byrne shot her in the head that easily, Gabriel Byrne can shoot everyone in the head easily. And that's the vibe you gotta have going into a climax of a movie like this. And I love that this movie, even in the time that it came out, where it was peak, like, honestly, a low-budget Carpenter movie in the 70s, you could imagine this movie having, a downer ending where all the good guys get killed. So like that believability is going to take you to the moment where they actually do end up triumphing. But 2005 was an era, especially movies going in every theater, to where you go in thinking like, well, the good guys are going to win. I just want to see how that happens. But they really went all in to convince you that this is a bad scenario. And on top of the fact that we're dealing with Hawk, who's kind of an unconventional hero here, because like I said, he's got kind of a slimy, almost unlikable quality to him. But somehow that's working with what's going on here. And then I guess Dre DeMatteo is kind of here to kind of fill in that gap a little bit that Bella ultimately leaves, to give us somebody to survive with him. But still, her dynamics with the characters throughout also are great. Also, especially in the scenes we were talking about, where it's like cop and criminal are interacting as it goes on. But now we kind of get to our climax here, and what's really, I swear, I say again, I totally get what Carpenter was going for with the Western feel. But with that said, I do find it very interesting also that the ending of this movie, not even just the ending of this movie, but the escape plan that goes wrong, everything that happens in like this last third or so here is right out of a zombie movie. Where it's like you have all of them coming in, a whole group of them, and you have to fight them off at the doors. And I said, even the escape route feels like right out of the scene of Dawn of the Dead, or even the original Night of the Living Dead. And I'm assuming there's a connection here, given that Frank Doubleday, the guy that kills Kim Richards at the beginning, is one of the most memorable characters in Escape from New York, as a character named Romero. I'm assuming there's some mutual love here. And the fact that Assault on Precinct 13 predates Dawn of the Dead by 2 years. is wild. So it's almost like I almost feel like there's got to be a mutual thing going back and forth there between Carpenter and Romero and like this '70s area, where they were kind of inspired by each other. And so that's the thing is like I love the Western idea. I totally get the Western idea, but Assault on Precinct 13 is also a horror movie, and it's hard. I know it. I can feel it. It's in there. Um, and yeah, the remake's an action movie. There's gonna be guns going off and a lot of all this. There's a scene they pluck right from Die Hard 2, the icicle in the eye. There is that really cool shot from far away where we see like all the guns going off and we just kind of see and hear it from a distance and we just see the lights going off. So they do get creative with it, but it does also kind of get us to a sort of typical sort of climax, which leaves us on the what one might be able to call the questionable ending. I like the ending of the original better, when it's like they give Napoleon, dignity as they sort of walk out, but he's still walking out, with the cops. The idea of letting him go in the remake, I'm not sure. I guess there's some ambiguity there, to where it's like surely he'll be caught eventually, but it won't be because of Ethan Hawke. Maybe, because the bishop that Lawrence Fishburne plays is a very, very dangerous person. They really should be locked away. And I get them going for like this mutual understanding kind of thing, because Gabriel Byrne was the real bad guy. But I mean, no, most of them were real bad guys. And it's like, I was, toying with the idea of, like, not necessarily saying Napoleon's an antagonist, because technically he's not by definition, but Napoleon's still a bad guy in the original movie. So that's where it's like, I get what they were going for, but, I don't know. It might be a little misguided, but I guess the point that I want to come to is that talking about taking a concept and expanding on it kind of seems to be what a remake should be. I'm not saying that, the 2005 movie is a perfect remake by remake standards or anything. But like I said, if you're gonna remake a movie, instead of doing it like step by step, like taking it like where they're not changing the story necessarily completely. Like the motives, sure, but as far as taking it and taking the concept and then expanding on it, sort of feels like what a remake should be. Sort of like when I talk about the difference between Infernal Affairs and The Departed, where it's like it's the same story, but The Departed just expanded so much, whether it be character or how you could, add extra layers to the story or whatever, and make it kind of roll in different directions. All that. Bring up new stuff, that could be, talking points or whatever. That's just add, like, little mysterious elements to it, little ambiguous things. Yeah, so, like I said, though, there's nothing like a Carpenter feel and a Carpenter mood. So that'll always be the one that I come back to first. But I do, after some time, and like I said, interestingly enough, comparing it to the original is kind of what highlights the things that it does well, like we were talking about with the Manchurian Candidate, when usually it's the total opposite effect. So I do very much commend the remake for that. But like I said, it's you just kind of can't beat Carpenter. This was like we could have this whole discussion, but it was futile. You're just not gonna beat Carpenter, and this won't be the first time. This won't be the only time I say that, because we might be talking about Carpenter again very soon when we get to October. So continuing with the remake feel. So I think that's how I feel about these. So the next thing is going to be, I think we only have one remake versus left for September, and it's kind of a big one. It's 3 movies, and we'll see. And then we're also going to kind of do a remake thing at the end of the month that's not, I guess, wasn't technically part of this, but I guess it kind of is. But you'll see what that is. So yeah, so we got this stuff, we got William Hurt stuff, we've got reviews, and other stuff, award stuff, everything. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.